The following was created under Creative Commons terms of use. Unless indicated otherwise, most images came from Wikipedia through a Creative Commons license. The following is a Mr. Black production. Achaemenid Persian Imperial capitals and Greek polises. Compared. We will examine the use of urban areas in an imperial state structure versus individual city-states. The earliest urban traditions began almost simultaneously in Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Harappa more than 5,000 years ago. The Achaemenid dynasty of Persia united these lands when they created the world's first great empire. They built upon the existing urban traditions to create a uniquely Persian imperial capital system. However, out on the margins, the Greeks were developing their own urban traditions. Eventually, these two states would come into conflict. We are going to use the following elements as the basis of this comparison. Background information. We will examine the influence of geography and the environment on the development of cities in both Persia and Greece. The purpose of cities. We will examine the function that cities played within their societies. The intended audience of the cities. We will examine the primary users of the urban spaces. Part 1. The Achaemenid Persian Imperial Capitals. The archaeologist Gregory Poso referred to the region between the eastern Mediterranean and the Indus Valley as the Middle Asian interaction sphere because it had a long tradition of social, cultural, and technological exchanges. The Persians utilized these links to create the world's first great empire, as they brought most of the region under a single political authority. Expanding from their homeland in Iran, the Persians acquired territories with some of the oldest urban traditions in the world. Most people would consider these to be barriers, but the Middle Asian interaction sphere is fairly arid and mountainous. The people in the area were able to establish connections throughout the region by both land and water. A common subsistence pattern in the region was transhumanist pastoralism. This is when people take advantage of the landscape by moving herds of animals vertically between highlands and lowlands. Summers are spent grazing animals on mountain pastures, and winters are spent in valley bottoms. Transhumanist pastoralism fits within an integrated agro-pastoral system where farmers and herders develop mutually beneficial relationships. During the winters, farming villages become base camps for herders as they recover from long periods spent away from shelter. The main type of animals in this system tend to be ovicaprids, sheep and goats. Here are some images of herders grazing their animals on mountain pastures during the summertime. Once winter arrives, the flocks and herds are driven down to the valleys where the animals eat the stalks from the previously harvested fields, and the animals deposit manure fertilizer on the fields. Farmers and herders exchange grains, crops, and finished goods for meat, hides, and dairy product. The Persians never forgot their pastoralist roots, as they developed a system of seasonal capitals. The royal court would spend winters in the valley bottoms in cities such as Babylon and Susa. Then the entire court would spend their summers in higher elevated cities such as Ecbatana, Pasargadae, or Persepolis. Persepolis and Pasargadae were constructed by the Persians, while the other cities were older capitals of states that the Persians had conquered. In order for the population to expand in many of these mountainous regions, the Persians needed to find a reliable source of water. The Qanat system is an ingenious method that taps into the lower water table near the top of a mountain and then uses underground channels to carry the water to valley bottoms below. This will be a topic for further discussion in later videos. In order to understand more about the Persian imperial capitals, We are going to follow this young Cushite man who has been summoned from his land to the south of Egypt to bring tribute, a tax in the form of a gift, to the Persian king of kings in Persepolis. On his visit, he is going to walk up the hill to the Apadana Palace towards the formal entrance, up the stairwell, across the corridor, and enter the throne hall where he will offer his tribute to the King of Kings. The Cushite is familiar with large buildings. He has seen pyramids in his own land, and he has passed by the great pyramids in Egypt during his journey. But he has never seen a place with such a large interior space. This will be his first time going inside such a large structure. Viewed from the back, as you look towards the entrance gate, one gets the sense of the size of this palace. Walking up the hill with the crowds of people from all over the empire towards the entryway, it makes him feel small, but not tiny or insignificant. As the line slowly progresses, the young Cushite starts to examine all the images that have been carved on the staircase. He sees images of imperial soldiers dressed for battle, and he knows that the Persians are willing to fight to defend for what they have built. From this view, he can see the soldiers standing to the right, pictures of animals on the bottom left, and images of people climbing the stairwell right above that. Upon closer examination, he realizes the message behind the animal picture. If you mess with the empire, it will come around to bite you right in the, well, you know. Then he looks at the tribute takers proceeding up the stairs, and he notices the different clothing and headdresses they wear. These carved images reflect the wide variety of faces that he sees around him. In both the crowds that have come to Persepolis and the carvings on the walls, the young Cushite sees the diversity of the empire all around him. The outside of the palace was covered in images that showed power and authority, but once inside, the tone seems to soften. The image on the bottom right shows Persians holding hands and conversing in a very friendly manner. Before entering the throne hall, someone tells him that the doorway has been named the Gate to All Nations. The Cushite has seen huge structures, but he has never been inside such a large space. He is already impressed. But as he enters the throne hall, he will be going into the tallest section of the palace. Once inside, he notices the height, and on top of the columns he sees bulls and griffins. He is starting to get a little nervous because he is not sure how to act in front of the King of Kings. During his journey, he wondered why the king had this title, but now he thinks he knows. The Persians allow many of the people they have conquered to keep their traditions and rulers as long as they keep the peace and pay a moderate amount of tribute to the Persians. Finally, he realizes how he should behave in front of the King of Kings. He needs to show this gesture of respect, or at least this is how the Cushite interpreted it. The Greeks, on the other hand, felt that this gesture meant the subjects were so low the king couldn't even risk breathing the same air. The true significance of this act is lost to time. Here is a recap of the Persian imperial capitals. The background. Achaemenid Persians maintained seasonal migrational patterns similar to their transhumanist pastoral ancestors. Vertical movement. Winter spent in river valleys and summer spent in mountain pastures. Imperial capitals, Pasargadae, Persepolis, and Ecbatana for the summer, Babylon and Susa during the winter. Purpose of the capitals, administrative and ceremonial centers, show power and authority. The intended audience, foreign dignitaries, state officials, and visiting citizens. Part 2. The Greek polises. Polis, a Greek city-state. Below you will see the singular and the plural versions. On the margin of the Persian Empire were the Greeks. Greece is located on a peninsula, so many of the inhabitants developed a strong connection to the sea. The Greeks utilized their strategic position within the Mediterranean Sea to travel and trade across vast distances. Similar to the Persians, the Greeks benefited from the social, cultural, and technological exchanges that came from their geographic location. Eventually, the Greeks began to colonize much of the Mediterranean coast. The map on the bottom right shows the areas where the Greeks colonized, and the larger map shows the location of Greek polises, or cities. Plato described the Greek relationship with the Med like this: like frogs around a pond, we have settled down upon the shores of the sea. In the interior, Greece had some land that was good for growing grains. However, much of Greece is mountainous with rocky, sandy soil. In order to get the necessities of life, many Greeks turned towards the sea. The mountains separated many of the polises from each other, so the Greeks felt that traveling by water was the easiest way to bridge these gaps. Much of the rocky, sandy soil of Greece provides poor growing conditions for wheat and other grains, but it is good for growing olives and grapes. Since these two crops do not last long, the Greeks converted them into long-lasting secondary products such as olive oil and wine. If stored properly in amphora jars, they could last for long periods of time, but due to their bulk, transportation by sea was the only viable option. Therefore, many Greeks turned towards commercial activities in order to acquire the necessities of life. The polis served as the political, artistic, and commercial center of the Greeks. The population usually ranged between 50,000 to 300,000 inhabitants. It was the city plus the surrounding food and crop producing hinterlands. City-states is not a powerful enough word to describe what the polis meant to the Greeks. It was the heart of the Greek identity. The bond and loyalty to the polis sometimes went above that of the family. The following were required for being an active participant in the polis. Only men were included. These men functioned as the military branch of the polis. Only men who could afford the extremely expensive armor and weapons it took to be a hoplite were accepted. Therefore, the poor were excluded. The hoplite citizen soldiers fulfilled all the military needs of the polis, such as defense or conquest. Just a side note on Greek architecture. These three pictures are of modern buildings, but they show the three main phases of Greek column styles. Also, the length of the name corresponds to the level of complexity. The longer the name, the more complex it is. The three styles are Doric, Ionian, and Corinthian. Now onto the elements of the polis. Since the polis was the heart of Greek life, they were designed with the inhabitants in mind. The Acropolis, which has polis in its name, means high city, and it is the religious district of the polis. Since it was usually built on a hilltop, it could be used as an emergency fortification if the polis were under attack. The agora was the commercial district of the city, but it was also the place to spend time talking about the latest news, gossip, and happenings in the polis. The Greeks had very little sense of themselves as individuals. They were part of the polis. And in order for the polis to become stronger, it was important for the citizens to share common emotions. The theater was a place for the entire polis to come together to laugh and to cry. This image shows the theater of the polis where the people united, and the mountains in the distance remind them of their separation between the other polises that surround them. The Greeks were highly competitive. They fought wars and had contests over who could write the best plays. They were fiercely competitive in athletic events. Here we see the palestra. that was used for boxing and wrestling, and a stadium that was used for running events. The Greek sense of unity in the polis even extended to the bathhouses. To summarize, here are the main elements of a polis: the Acropolis, the Agora, cultural and leisure areas, residential, industrial, and many polises had a port or harbor. This map shows the many polises of Greece. For the most part, each viewed itself as separate, but on occasion they would ally together. Even though the separate polises maintained their individual identities, the Greeks felt a sense of pan-Hellenic unity. After all, they were all sons and daughters of Helen of Troy. All Greeks would have known the works of Homer, such as the Iliad and the Odyssey. They were not only great works of literature to the Greeks, but they also contained significant religious messages. From the oracle at Delphi to the gods that lived on Mount Olympus, the Greeks shared a religious unity. The Greek polises would halt their armed conflicts in order to hold Olympic games to glorify the gods. Finally, the Greeks often united when they faced a common foe. Eventually, their hostilities were turned towards the Persians. A recap of the Greek polises. The background: Greece is a peninsula, so many Greeks turned towards the sea. The interior of Greece, the Peloponnesus, had good agricultural lands, but for the most part, Greece had rocky, sandy soil. Therefore, olives were converted into olive oil and grapes into wine. This became the basis for much of Greek commercial activity. The purpose of the polis were to meet the needs of the citizens. The intended audience were the inhabitants of the polis. The final conclusion of the Persian and Greek cities. The purpose for the Persian cities were to show their imperial power, while the Greeks created cities for their citizens. The audience of the Persian cities were visitors and outsiders, while the Greeks built their cities for their inhabitants. The end. I hope you enjoyed this presentation.